Thank you for clicking on this video. Remember to like, share and subscribe to continued stories. Also remember to click the notification bell so you can be notified whenever a new content is uploaded. In this video, we'll look at the top 5 countries for child labor. Sadly, child labor is still a prevalent issue in many countries around the world. Here are some of the countries that are known to have significant child labor issues. 1. India. Child labor is a significant issue in India, where a large number of children are forced to work under often exploitative and harmful conditions. Despite various laws and efforts by the government and NGOs to eradicate it, the problem persists due to widespread poverty, lack of education, and cultural norms. With a large population and a high number of children living in poverty, India has one of the highest rates of child labor. According to the International Labour Organization, in 2016, there were approximately 152 million children in India engaged in child labor. This represents almost a third of the global total. India has laws in place to prevent child labor. The Child Labor, Prohibition and Regulation Act of 1986 sets the minimum age for employment at 14 years for non-hazardous work and 18 years for hazardous work. In 2016, the government passed an amendment that strictly prohibits the employment of children under the age of 14 in any occupational activity, except for family businesses and farms with safety measures. Child labor is prevalent in various sectors, including agriculture, mining, manufacturing, construction, and the service industry. Many children are found working in small-scale industries, such as fireworks production, carpentry, and textiles. Some children in India are born into bonded labor, a form of modern slavery where they are forced to work to pay off family debts. This cycle of debt can continue for generations, trapping families in a cycle of poverty and exploitation. Trafficking of children for the purpose of labor is also a serious concern. Children are often lured from rural areas with the promise of better opportunities and education, only to be exploited in urban centers. The primary reason for child labor in India is extreme poverty. Many families rely on the income generated by their children to survive, making it difficult for them to prioritize education. Limited access to quality education and high dropout rates contribute to the prevalence of child labor. Many children are forced to work to support their families or because their parents cannot afford to send them to school. In some parts of the country, it is a cultural norm for children to contribute to the family's income from a young age. This can make it challenging to change societal attitudes toward child labor. The Indian government runs several programs to combat child labor, such as the Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan, Education for All, which aims to provide free and compulsory education to children aged 6 to 14, and the National Child Labor Project, which focuses on the rehabilitation of children working in hazardous occupations. There are numerous NGOs in India that work towards rescuing and rehabilitating child laborers, providing them with education, and raising awareness about the issue. The enforcement of child labor laws is often inadequate, with many cases going unreported or unaddressed due to corruption and lack of resources. Some child labor in India are linked to global supply chains, with products made by children being exported to developed countries. This has led to international pressure for stricter labor laws and better enforcement. 2. China. China has been facing the issue of child labor for many years, despite significant progress in reducing its prevalence. The problem is particularly acute in rural areas and among migrant workers' children, where economic pressures and lack of educational opportunities can lead parents to send their children to work in factories, mines, and agricultural settings. Despite economic growth, China still faces challenges with child labor, particularly in the manufacturing and industrial sectors. Many children work in unsafe conditions to support their families. China has laws in place to protect children from labor exploitation. The minimum age for employment law states that the legal working age is 16, with some exceptions for light work at 14. The law on the prevention and handling of juvenile delinquency and the compulsory education law also contain provisions to protect children's rights. The exact number of child laborers in China is difficult to determine due to the informal nature of much of the work and the varying definitions of child labor. However, the International Labour Organization and UNICEF estimate that there are approximately 10 million children aged 5 to 17 engaged in some form of labor, with the majority involved in the agricultural sector. Children in China are found working in various industries, including textiles, electronics, toys, mining, and agriculture. They often perform dangerous and physically demanding tasks, such as assembling circuit boards, working in coal mines, or harvesting crops. Some are also subject to forced labor and human trafficking. Poverty is the main driver of child labor in China. Many families in rural areas rely on their children's earnings to support the household. Additionally, limited access to quality education and the high cost of schooling can make it difficult for parents to justify keeping their children in school. The Chinese government has made efforts to combat child labor. These include increasing the minimum wage, investing in rural education, and conducting inspections of businesses. In 2013, China launched a 3-year campaign to eliminate child labor in industries with high risks of exploitation. Over the past few decades, China has made substantial progress in reducing child labor. The number of children involved in work has declined significantly, partly due to economic growth and increased investment in education. The country has also seen a reduction in the number of children involved in the worst forms of child labor. Despite progress, challenges persist. Some children are still working under hazardous conditions, and enforcement of labor laws can be inconsistent. Additionally, the informal economy and the use of underage migrant workers can make it difficult to monitor and regulate child labor practices. China is a signatory to the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child and has ratified 2 ILO conventions on child labor. The country collaborates with international organizations to address the issue, but more work is needed to ensure that all children are protected and have access to education. One of the most critical measures to combat child labor is education reform. By providing free and compulsory education, China can help keep children in school and out of the workforce. The government has made strides in this area, with nearly all children now enrolled in primary school. However, dropout rates remain high in rural areas, particularly among girls and children from poor families. 3. Pakistan. Child labor in Pakistan is a significant issue that involves children being employed in various industries and sectors, including agriculture, manufacturing, services, and even in the informal economy. Despite laws and international conventions that prohibit the exploitation of children, the practice remains widespread due to a combination of factors such as poverty, lack of access to education, and cultural norms. According to the International Labour Organization, in 2020, approximately 16 million children aged 5 to 17 were engaged in some form of labor in Pakistan, which constitutes almost 9% of the total population in that age group. The country has one of the highest rates of child labor in the world. The most common industries where child labor is prevalent are agriculture, textiles, carpet making, brick kilns, mining, and the service sector, including domestic work. Children are often employed in hazardous conditions and are vulnerable to physical and sexual abuse. Poverty is a major driver of child labor, and many families in Pakistan rely on the income generated by their children to make ends meet. Additionally, the lack of quality education and schooling options, as well as high school dropout rates, contribute to the problem. Moreover, there is a cultural acceptance of child labor in some communities, which sees it as a means of teaching children skills or contributing to family income. The country's constitution forbids forced labor and provides for a minimum working age of 14 years for non-hazardous work and 18 years for hazardous work. However, the enforcement of these laws remains a challenge. The government of Pakistan has initiated various programs to combat child labor, such as the National Plan of Action for the Elimination of the Worst Forms of Child Labor and the Benazir Income Support Program, which provides financial assistance to families with the condition that their children attend school. Additionally, there are laws that mandate education for children aged 5 to 16 and penalties for employers who hire underage workers. The enforcement of child labor laws is weak due to inadequate resources and the complexity of the issue. Moreover, the informal nature of many workplaces makes it difficult to track and regulate employment practices. The large number of unregistered and small-scale businesses also contributes to the problem, as they often operate outside the purview of labor laws. Child labor has severe consequences for the children involved, including health issues, stunted growth, and limited education and skill development, which can perpetuate the cycle of poverty. It also hinders the overall economic and social development of the country by reducing the quality of the workforce and depriving children of their childhood and education. While there have been some improvements in reducing the prevalence of child labor, significant challenges remain. The future outlook depends on sustained efforts from the government, civil society, and international organizations to address the root causes, such as poverty and lack of education, and to enforce existing laws effectively. 4. Bangladesh. Bangladesh has one of the highest rates of child labor in the world. According to the International Labour Organization, in 2016, 5.7 million children aged 5 to 17 were involved in some form of child labor in Bangladesh. This is despite the fact that the country has made significant progress in reducing child labor rates in recent years. Known for its garment industry, Bangladesh has a history of child labor, with many children working in factories, often under poor conditions and for very low wages. The primary reason for child labor is extreme poverty. Many families rely on the income generated by their children to meet their basic needs, such as food, clothing, and shelter. Limited access to quality education and high school dropout rates force many children to enter the workforce at a young age to support their families. The prevalence of the informal economy and the demand for cheap labor in various sectors, such as textiles, agriculture, and manufacturing, contribute to the problem. Some cultural practices view children as contributing members of the family and thus accept child labor as a norm. While Bangladesh has laws in place to combat child labor, they are often not strictly enforced, especially in the informal sector. With a large population, competition for jobs is intense, and children are often seen as a source of cheap labor. Many adults earn very low wages, making it difficult for families to survive on a single income. The government has established minimum age requirements for work and has been working to enforce these laws more strictly. Initiatives have been introduced to provide free and compulsory primary education, which has helped increase school enrollment rates and reduce the number of children working. Despite these efforts, challenges persist. The garment industry, in particular, has made progress but still faces issues with child labor in its supply chains. Additionally, children often work in dangerous and exploitative conditions, with insufficient legal protection and high rates of abuse. 5. Vietnam. Vietnam has made significant progress in reducing child labor over the past few decades, but it remains a persistent issue in certain sectors of the country's economy. The Vietnamese government has implemented various laws and policies aimed at eliminating child labor, including the revised Labor Code of 2012, which sets the minimum working age at 15 for non-dangerous work and 18 for hazardous work. Many families rely on the income generated by their children to make ends meet. In rural areas and among lower-income households, children are often sent to work to contribute to the family's earnings. Not all children have access to quality education, which can lead them to seek work at an early age. Additionally, the cost of education can be a barrier for some families, pushing children into the workforce. A large number of children are involved in agricultural work, which is often considered a family affair and not always recognized as child labor. Children may work on family farms or be hired by others in the sector. The informal economy is a significant part of Vietnam's labor market, making it challenging to monitor and regulate. Children can be found working in small workshops, markets, and other informal settings. Children from rural areas may migrate to urban centers seeking better opportunities, making them vulnerable to exploitation and forced labor. The enforcement of child labor laws can be inconsistent, particularly in remote and rural areas where resources and capacity are limited. Children may be working in unregistered businesses or in private homes, making it difficult to detect and address the issue. Some laws do not cover all forms of child labor, such as work performed by children outside of standard working hours or in the informal sector. It is important to note that while these countries are often associated with child labor, the issue is global and can be found in various forms in many other countries as well. Organizations such as the International Labour Organization, UNICEF, and the World Bank are working towards eliminating child labor by promoting education, fair labor laws, and poverty reduction strategies. Consumers can also play a role by supporting companies that are transparent about their supply chains and committed to fair labor practices. Thank you for watching. If you are interested in this content, please remember to like, share, subscribe, and click the notification bell.